Well, when you look at, for example, streaming has attracted zillions of dollars of capital. So you look at Spotify with a market cap of like $30 billion and they've never made money. I got in trouble once at a conference and I said, we made more. Somebody asked about Pandora. I said, we love those guys, but I made more money at Emmis before breakfast today than they've made in 12 years.
Benztown president Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
I'd like to welcome someone who I've just candidly admired my whole entire career, and just not myself, but I think the whole industry looks up to this man, Jeff Smulyan, the chairman, CEO, and founder of Emmis Communications. And Jeff, from the very get-go of this podcast, has been so supportive and gracious and was one of the very first people to agree to do it. And then we just haven't been able to put it together because I wanted to be there in person. Because he means that much to me, and just to be able to spend time with him like that would be incredible. But unfortunately, because of COVID-19, it just wasn't possible. And so we decided to do this via online. And he is joining us right now from his corporate offices in Indianapolis. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Chachi, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry it's taken us so long, but the pandemic has changed a lot of things.
That it has, and we'll get into that in a second. Let me just give, for those of you who don't know Jeff, and I find it hard to believe that someone in this industry does not, I'll give you a little bit of background on him and his bio. First of all, he's an owner of, or has owned legendary stations, Power 106, The Fan, Hot 97, BLS. He owned, no joke, the Seattle Mariners at one point. He's the former director of the NAB, and he was named by the White House to head up a U.S. delegation that helped negotiate a landmark agreement between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, which I can't wait to learn more about, because that talking about a whole other level of importance to be assigned by the White House to take on a project like that and broker peace. I'm excited to hear about it. He's also won a myriad of awards, and I have to imagine in Indianapolis there's a trophy case that is at least 100 yards long. He was a giant of broadcasting by the Library of American Broadcasting, an inductee in the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame. The Broadcasters Foundation honored him with a Golden Mike Award, and in 2017, he received the Lowry Mays Excellence in Broadcasting Award. Emmis was also named on Fortune Magazine's 100 Best Companies to Work For, and I got a story about that also, but just the employees that have worked for you over the years have said such wonderful things about you, and probably out of all your awards, I look at that one as being incredible and just a testament to how you run your company.
Thanks, Chachi. Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your childhood and in growing up.
I grew up here in a family of my parents and three kids, fairly normal, middle class, maybe a little upper middle class existence in a near-in suburb of Indianapolis. Family is very close. My parents have both passed away now, but my sister and brother and I are all very close. A lot of aunts and uncles and cousins. And, I think I look back, it was a fairly normal. I mean, we all look at our families and say, we have the only dysfunctional family in the world. But as I really look compared to everybody else, it was a fairly normal existence. And grew up here and then went to USC for college and law school. And then my dad talked me into coming back. I'm one of those strange people. I had this discussion with my now 16-year-old daughter about, I was rare. I knew what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And I think it's true of a lot of friends in my era. They sort of grew up with radio, listening to transistor radios under their pillow, listening to rock and roll and ball games, and just sort of fell in love with the industry, and it was always what I wanted to do.
Was this something were your parents pretty supportive of that, or were they wanting to go on and do other things?
My dad always wanted me to be a lawyer. And it was funny, when I was getting out of college, I was going to go up to Stanford to get a master's in telecom.
Wow.
Go to law school, get a law degree. And I kind of laugh, in those days, it was like, nobody really went to get an MBA. Business was like looked at differently. I laugh said if I had actually gotten an MBA, I probably would have understood the concept of risk and never started a company. But I got a lot. Somebody said, go get a law degree. If you want to be an entrepreneur, it'll teach you how to understand how the world works. And you'll have more credibility wanting to be an entrepreneur when you're a lawyer than when you're having, a master's in telecom. And I did it. I wrote my law review article on the Federal Communications Commission, the infamous Clear Channel Doctrine. I think it was great training. I would recommend it to anybody. I have been on inactive status in the State Bar of Indiana for probably 40 years. And I always kid, if I actually had to practice law, they would just bar me on the spot. They would just, you now have gone into active status, and now we're going to kick you out of the bar because you're incompetent. But I never practiced. But I love the training.
Yeah, it's a great foundation, and probably some remarkable advice that your father gave you to go and do that. And
I think he really wanted me. I had a couple of really flattering offers from some big law firms, and he thought I was crazy, but it was you got to do what you love.
So he wanted you to go on. He obviously would have rathered you, at least at that time. I'm sure he's incredibly proud now, or looking down, incredibly proud. But he probably would have preferred you to go on and work at a big firm.
Yeah, I think he I know thought I was nuts for a while, although, and then he was very proud. We were very close.
So you came out here to LA and went to USC, and you graduated at the top of your class. And
not quite the top of my class. I was my dad was one of those people who used to tease me, and so when I graduated, I think I had like a 3.3 or something. He said, you could have been Phi Beta Kappa. No, I wasn't. And in my law school class, I think I finished in the top 20, 25%. He said, order the COIF top 10%. You could have done that. It's funny. They interviewed me for a retrospective on law school, and they did a history of the USC Law School. And they said, "What's your one regret?" I said, "My one regret is that I went to 7 years of college and law school, and my only goal was to learn as little as possible." I think I, turned on a switch when I was 25 or so, and I went from the least disciplined human being in the world to the most disciplined. I've always got to be doing something all the time. And I have two grown kids and my 16-year-old. And I always tell her, I think you have more discipline than me, and I'm thrilled. That's my one regret. I was a pretty good test taker, but it kills me that I spent 7 years at a great university and didn't learn as much as I should have.
Did you enjoy, though, the social aspect? What were some of the extracurricular activities that you would do?
I was Phi Beta Kappa of social stuff. I love that. And
good. Well, you got a lot out of college. I think a lot of people look back and go, I didn't have enough fun.
Yeah, I didn't. That wasn't my problem. Under no circumstances was that my problem in college or law school.
Oh, that's great. So you moved back after school, turned down a couple jobs at law firms, and then end up back in Indianapolis, your hometown. And how did it first start? I
had started looking to buy small stations when I got out of school. And my dad, who said, look, my dad had been in his father's business and his father-in-law's business, and then had gone into motels and some apartments and some real estate. And he wanted me to come back. And he had a cousin who had a very small, bad radio station that was sort of floundering. And he said, told the cousin, look, if I can convince Jeff to come back and run it for you, I'll invest in it. And he did. And I resisted for a long time because I thought the station was lousy, which it was.
Was this NTS, WNTS?
Yes, NTS. And we did it. And I've always said, you do your best work in the worst situations. So whenever you have an impossible business project, there's an old Warren Buffett line, show me great people and an impossible project. And 2 years later, I'll show you worn out great people and a project that's still impossible. But we did it and we loved it. The only regret, we had our midday guy was David Letterman. I don't know whatever happened to Dave.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because there was a book I read recently about Letterman, and you were actually quoted in the book. And so, was Letterman already working at the station when you?
No. It was a daytime country station. We switched it to News, Talk, and Sports (NTS). And my brother, who said, "You got to hire Letterman." We were looking for talk. We had news in the morning and we had sports in the afternoon. And he said, and I knew of Dave. Dave was doing the weekend weather on the local, I think, Channel 13, which I think was NABC. Now it's NBC. He said, "You got to watch Letterman." And I watched him, and Letterman was, it's just Letterman. And
even delivering the weather is.
Letterman would say it's 48 in Muncie, it's 48 in Kokomo. They'll play off that tie next week. It's great when he says, we've got gale force winds and we've got threats of tornadoes, but don't worry about that because there's a line of ICBMs headed, for Beach Road right now. So don't worry about the bad weather. I mean, he was hilarious. And we hired him, and Dave was Dave. I mean, absolutely brilliant. He would do, I'll never forget my least favorite moment, actually. I came back from lunch one day, and the problem with talk radio, as you know, is you reach a geriatric set. So you got a 25-year-old guy who is the sensibilities of 25-year-olds like me and the other people there. And most of your listeners are 60 plus, and they're very conservative. And I'll never forget, I came back from lunch one day, and the guy said, "You got a communist working for you. That guy's a communist, and I want him fired."
Oh, my God. Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. That's what did he do? He said, "Well, I called in and said, I think, the communists are in Carmel, and we got to get rid of the communists." Carmel's a big suburb of Indianapolis. And Letterman said, I think you got to give the communists Carmel because the schools are, overcrowded and the shopping malls are nuts and the parking lots. I think you give the communist Carmel and hold the line at Nora, which is another. It was just, that was Dave. I mean, David did stuff like that, and every day was a new adventure. And you had a cult of 25, 30-year-olds who just thought it was the greatest radio ever, but most of the audience thought, "Who is this guy?" David couldn't talk about current affairs. I mean, he knew a little bit, but you had most guys on talk radio or policy wonks, and David wasn't. It's brilliant. The biggest regret I had, David, when he took the job, said, "I'm going to go to California and try to make it within a year." And it was, sure enough, a year later, he went. He actually, to help fund him, we paid for reports that he did from the West Coast.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I still remember he covered the Rose Parade, and he said they ran out of roses, so this year they did it all in pork rinds and the stems up Colorado Avenue, and it was just brilliant stuff. The only regret I have is that the guy who replaced him doing talk is a guy named Rick Cummings.
Oh man, that was a terrible mistake.
Terrible mistake. I have regretted that mistake almost 45 years. I've regretted that mistake. Cummings was like an intern. He was there. I think he was fired at WFMS, and for some, who knows? And he ended up doing, replacing Letterman, and he did production, and we did a Saturday sports talk show, which we had more fun with, and we just became very close friends. And I told him the station, when this is long before your time, but the station switched to NBC's All News Network because it was just, you're basically piping in all news, and that NBC pulled the plug on that. And we knew it wasn't going to, be competitive. Rick had left by then and gone to Hartford. And we ultimately made it religion where it stayed. I went off to found Emmis and actually bought a second religious station. But it was a great experience.
So that was the stepping stone to Emmis. And before I get there,
yeah.
And I was going to bring this up a little bit later, but now that we're talking about Letterman and Rick, who in all seriousness is just an amazing talent in his own right, and I think a programming genius. But the talent that has been born out of Emmis is remarkable. Obviously, Letterman, Big Boy,
Yeah.
Ebro, Woody, Mike Francesa. I mean, it's incredible. How do you do that? How do you uncover, in most of these talent, including Letterman, were kind of I don't want to say nowhere, but certainly in the infancy of their careers.
Well, I wanted to be, take a lot more shots at Cummings, but I won't. I should tell you that I told him someday I'm going to start my company and you're going to be the first person I hire. And he always joked and said, if I wasn't, unemployable, I never would have taken the job with you. But years later, and without being flippant, the answer is Rick. I mean, Rick has a better ability to understand, people and talent and how to motivate people and work with people. Obviously we're inseparable. We've been together all these years and, we'll be together, forever. He's, I would trust him with anything. And we're and I also believe there's no one who's understood programming and content in America like Rick. So now I'm not going to say anything nice about him for the rest.
I can tell you guys love each other like brothers, and there is it's an incredible relationship that you have. True. I am enamored at your ability to find and groom talent and create them, help them grow into superstars. And also brands. You've done that time and time again, and I'll get into some of those in a minute, but is just something that is so incredibly difficult to do. And you guys have done it multiple times. Doing it once, you can say you've caught lightning in a bottle, but to do it time and time again in different cities is phenomenal.
I think it's the culture, it's the people, it's how we treat each other, how we treat people. I'm very proud of it. I think, there's a lot of things you look at in your life and you say, well, I wish it had been this or that. But I'm very proud of how we've treated people over the years. And I think when you look back at your life, you don't look at this high or this low or whatever. You look at, sort of the journey that you've had. And I'm very pleased and proud of the journey we've had.
When you founded Emmis, you based it on the Hebrew word for truth, which I find very fascinating. And this is really early on in your career. You're what, 26, 27 maybe at this time?
I think I was 30 when we started. Yeah. 30. Yeah, when the company started.
Were these values, and the very nature of the name of the company, I think, is an incredible value or ethic. Was this something that was instilled at an early age by your parents?
Yeah, I think so. I know so. I think there's certain values that you have and how you treat people and how you view the world and what your obligations are to your family and your community and society at large. And I think those are core values. And, I had a law professor who said, we all live by an 8x8. And some people live for love or money or power or sex or glory or whatever. And you sort of figure out what's important to you. And I've certainly, there's no question that family and this company have been the things that have motivated me. And, I doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, I should have sold the company a long time ago, but it's worked out well and I'm proud of it.
I find it admirable, and I look up to you guys. I can't express how much. Tell me a little bit now. You at NTS is your stepping stone, and now you form Emmis, and you build a company that goes on to be publicly traded and incredibly successful. What's your first move? What's it like being a 30-year-old Jeff with a brand new company?
Well, it was my dream. It took us, we signed an agreement to buy a Class B FM in Shelbyville. Now, if you remember, there's every state's either B or C. Indiana's B, which means you can have 50,000 watts at 500 feet. It was underallocated. We used to joke that the AM got all the Major League Little League games and the FM got the Minor League Little League games. Or the Shelbyville High School team was on the AM and the junior varsity game or the Rushville High School game, which is a smaller town, was on the FM. But they weren't utilizing it. And I went to them. We actually looked at station in Greenfield first that Cecil Heftel ended up buying, which is now WZPL, and couldn't get that done. And we made a deal with the people in Shelbyville who were wonderful. And I had some original investors, and we bought it. And it took us 2 years to get the tower built for all sorts of crazy things we went through. And we launched it on July 4th, 1981. I called Cummings in when we were getting ready to start, and he was working in New Orleans, and he came up. He wasn't, I refer to him as the first employee. He was really the second employee because our engineer who was helping put the tower together was our first. But we started with a radio station that was adult contemporary, and it was a skyrocket. WNTS, and we did everything. I mean, we were at the TV commercial and picked all the records and, all the equipment and hired the salespeople and did the training. And it was just, it was a mom and pop thing, just a few of us. And it took off. It was sort of, your wildest dreams. We had a lot of those experiences in the first 10 years of the company.
That's fantastic. Was there a lot of celebration?
There was a lot of celebration. I can still remember the day we had we had our second rating book was a 10 share, and that was first or second in the market. I think it was second.
Oh my gosh.
I think WIBC was still probably a 12 or something. But for the startup FM to go from a 0 to a 7 to a 10 was just unbelievable. And I'll never forget when we got the ratings. I don't know if you ever knew John Horton or Gary Rosnick. Rozzy has been in the business a lot. He stayed with us and now has gone on to several other ventures. But we called an immediate staff meeting for a big party, and everybody hardworking. And here comes Rosnick and Horton in their golf shorts. They had obviously been on the golf course goofing off. But it was a lot of fun.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So now you've got, a lot of people would say, and I'm interested in where I'm going with this, is that your entrepreneurial side, that you've been successful with the station and you're doing great. And that would be enough for a lot of people. But you've had this desire and this inner entrepreneurial spirit, it sounds like, you want more. And what drives that?
Well, I think we're all crazy in our own ways. I always just want to build a company. And people said, I knew you in the beginning and you said I do this and this and this. Absolutely not true. But it was just sort of like, let's just do what we want to do and see if we're good at it. And I think one of the things that I learned early on, I think I had a horrible fear of failure when I was in my early 20s. And for some reason, I think I got over it. And so I've done things in my life which I knew were long shots, whether it was Next Radio or wireless TV or introducing the concept of revenue sharing in baseball, that were kind of long shots. But it was sort of like, you know what? I love trying to do things that people say can't be done. And so as far as the company, it was like, hey, let's go on to the next thing. We bought WLOL, and that really, took off, not because of us, but, we always said it wasn't Emmis management with LOL. It was the threat of Emmis management, because we bought the station, and while we're waiting to close, the thing goes from a 4 share to a 10 share, and that was all Doyle.
Wow.
And, I'll never forget Steve Crane, who was one of my oldest, dearest friends, came in, was practicing law in Chicago, and he was bored, and he said, I want to come in when you start this thing. And he bought a little stock, and he came in, and so he was going to run the second station. So we sent him up to Minneapolis. And after he's meeting with Doyle in the interim, while you're waiting the 3 or 4 months to close the deal, he called me one day and said, look, this guy's a lot better than me. We got to leave him. He's, and so Doyle stayed with us, and, we were together for many, many years.
Which is incredibly astute. We've seen in the very modern era that we're in right now that acquiring companies, a lot of times will go in and gut the existing infrastructure and not learn, at least in my estimation, learn the things that they probably should, the institutional knowledge about that company before making changes. And that at 30 years old or 31, however old you were, was incredibly mature.
Well, I have another favorite saying is I've never met a human being who walks in the morning and says, how do I screw my job up? I really want to do a bad job. So we started with the bias that most people are trying to do well. There are times when you got to make changes. But our thought was, number one, if obviously there are times when you say, look, we see this business, we got to make changes. But generally our bias is, let's see if we can work with the people we find and have them run it. Another one of my favorite sayings is and we even brought him to a manager's meeting once. There was a football coach named Bum Phillips, who was a legendary coach of the Houston Oilers. And Phillips, they asked him about leadership. And he said, Don Shula. He said, Don Shula can take his guys and beat your guys. And then he could take your guys and beat his guys. That's a leader. That's a great
saying.
And I always used to use the Bum Phillips story. And one year they said, we're getting Bum Phillips to speak at our managers meeting. And he's passed away now, but he was delightful.
Oh, that's cool.
But we have generally said, that we would, find the people. We just bought another business and liked the management team and said, look, hopefully we can add things. But it's also what we've said when we bought businesses. We said, look, our job is not to treat our new employees like we're a conquering army. You walk in and you treat everybody with respect, and you don't lord your ideas. You're there to listen and learn and help. And I think that's worked pretty well for us over the years.
I think it's not only worked great for you over the years, I find it so humane. I find it builds incredible loyalty. I will tell a quick story, but when you sold Power a couple of years ago, I had lunch with one of the on-air staff members who's still on air there. And we were talking about it, of course. And he told me that after selling the station, that you came to town and took everyone out, I believe, to lunch or dinner. And at that event, you gave everyone a check. He didn't tell me the amount, but he told me that he was flabbergasted by how generous the amount was as a thank you for helping build the radio station over the years. And I've never heard a story like that until he told it to me. And I was just shocked by it and want to say, man, that's impressive.
Well, we feel like, our people got us there. I look at Power and, you can see, what it was when we bought it and how high it got, and then it came most of the way back down. But we had people who you're only as good as your people. And, listen, I wish it could have been more, but it was a gesture that we said, thank you. You guys have done great things for us. So again, Chachi, you are who you are. Cummings and I, you always say, look, doesn't make us good or bad. It's just who we are. My late mother and I sort of had the same personality. And I said, sometimes that doesn't make you, because we look at it the problem the same way, doesn't make us right or wrong. It's just you are who you are. And those are the things that, make me feel the way I want to live my life.
So in the 80s, you start to now LOL, and then you ENS, Keishi, Power, QHT, which eventually became the Fan. You buy stations in DC. Yeah. And by 87, you're now the largest privately owned radio broadcasting company in the U.S. I mean, that's unbelievable. That was what, in 7 years' time, 8 years' time?
6, 7 years. Yeah. I mean, it just was sort of, we were really good at buying things and figuring out what would make them work. And like I said, we got some breaks. No human being succeeds without getting lucky. Indianapolis went well. Minneapolis went well because of what Doyle did, really. We looked at Keishi and said, boy, this is one of the great brands of all time, but it's absolutely got to be reinvented. I mean, we had so much fun. If you remember Sweet Meat the Pig, mascot of Keishi with the joint in his mouth. And what we found is, heavy metal, album rock people loved it, but the business community said that pigs are reprobate. The whole station's a renegade. So we streamlined the pig, and we created a mascot where we went to every hospital at every charity event. And we had so much. So we had Stuart Lane, who was with us, created the perception versus reality, which I didn't know at the time. He actually stole from a Rolling Stone campaign, but I didn't know
really?
It. Yeah, he would take a picture of a guy who looked like he had just blown up the Federal Building, and that was then. And now he was a district attorney, or a woman who looked like she had, been traveling with the Grateful Dead, and now she was a leading surgeon in St. Louis. And it was then and now, all these people, and the constant was, then they listened to Keishi, now they listen to Keishi. And it was just sort of, and we used to tease Rick Bayless, who was our PD, and say, play palatable music. Don't play the 11th cut on the Stones album. play the first cut on the stuff. Occasionally, like you listen occasionally, and you're a rock and roll fan, you still don't know the music. And for fun, and it took off. And Power, we was originally Magic 106, it was an AC station, and we said, well, we're supposed to be good at AC, and we had a chance to hire Robert W. Morgan, and Robert W. was iconic to me because when I was going to school in Los Angeles, KHJ was everything, so you had Robert W., who was the morning man. We brought him back. We gave it a year and a half, and with all of our great marketing skills and programming skills, we took a station that I think had a 2.1 when we bought it. I think it was a 1.9 when we flipped the format, so it just didn't go anywhere. And we had always talked about this hybrid rhythmic, station that would sort of mesh all the assimilated Hispanics and young African Americans and sort of hip white kids in the suburbs. And we thought about that in the beginning. We didn't do it. And then after a year and a half, we said, let's do it. And that became Power. And, it just skyrocketed.
Yeah. And a cultural phenomenon. I mean, just amazing what you created with Power, and still to this day, a tremendous brand. And, credit to Morello for, I think, doing a pretty darn good job. After losing Big Boy, it still holds up incredibly well against Real and beats it on a regular basis. And that goes to show you the power of, no pun intended, but the power of a brand and what you created. Were you always, your stations, and I've got a lot of respect for marketing and branding. It's a lot of what we do. And I think you guys are such pioneers in that space. Was branding and marketing and the creative process always important to you as a CEO?
Absolutely. And I think what broke my heart is we got past the sort of the period where the industry sort of went into this decline and you couldn't allocate as much as you did to marketing. But, the marketing of the stations was the most fun, and building the brand. And I mean, I think about the campaigns we did for ENS or for Power or for LOL or Keishi or Fan, some of the best, stuff we've ever done. But the industry's changed so much. But we love the idea of what are we going to do to build a brand?
I remember as a kid and young adult, could not get away the Power billboards and bus boards, and you guys did such a phenomenal, and I always thought it was a really good humor around it as well, which is not easy to do.
We've always attracted great people. Diana Jason did the stuff at Power, and just remarkable stuff.
So talk to me about growing outside of radio, and you acquired in, I think, the late 80s and starting into the 90s, Indianapolis Monthly. You had 15 television stations, and then I want to get more into the Mariners here in a second. But what made you decide to move out of, expand beyond radio?
Well, the magazine was interesting. The magazine was sort of the city magazine of Indianapolis. And I have a cousin, dear friend, who was the editor-in-chief, and we've been friends for life. And she called me one day and said, okay, I can't avoid it anymore. I got to do a cover story on you. And, she was a dear friend. And we did the story. And it turns out that the publisher the family said, we don't want to own this anymore. And so one thing led to another, and we bought it. And they were very good, Debbie, and we brought in people around her for sales. Jack Marcella, who had worked with us, at MTS and went to WIBC, and they were good at it. And then later we bought Atlanta, and then we got a chance to buy Texas Monthly in Los Angeles. And we just had great people. They always won every award, and the business was good. And as far as TV, we really got into TV after the Deregulation Act of 96. We looked at radio values and we said, the math doesn't work. You had a period where for 20 years, everything was 8 times cash flow, 9 times cash flow, 10 times cash flow. And now stuff was 22 times cash flow.
Jeez.
And we looked at it, and that was when Wall Street discovered the industry. And if you remember Lowry and Mel and a few other companies, your stock was trading at 10, and you buy an asset at 9, and it would be accretive. And then the next year, your stock was trading at 12, you'd buy something at 11. And it kept going up. And every time they buy something for a little less than their cash flow, it was accretive. And all of a sudden, people are trading at 22 times cash flow and buying things at 21 times. And we looked at it and said, this doesn't work. So we said, look, Greg Nathanson was on my board, had been a roommate in college. Greg was at that time president of Fox Entertainment, and had run the Tribune stations. And we both agreed that TV, our skills were transferable to TV, but also that we thought television had to get a second revenue stream. But if you study the industry, you knew that the law changed in 1992, allowing local stations to get paid by the cable operators, but through really the brilliance of John Malone, he had prevented it. And we said, look, these guys have to get a second revenue stream. In those days, I think in 98, when we bought our first TV station, we said, look, 65% of everything that's watched on the local cable system is, NBC, CBS, ABC, and Fox. So, and yet they get $0. So we said, let's go that way, and let's not chase values in radio that don't make any sense.
And did you buy television in markets that accompanied your radio assets, or? No,
other than Terre Haute, where we bought the company and we got the stations, we thought there was some synergy, but we thought, number one, our radio assets were mostly in the largest markets in the country. So you're not going to go to CBS and say, okay, we'll take Channel 2 in New York because we have Hot 97. So we just said, let's just find things that make sense. And mostly our largest markets were Portland, Oregon, and Orlando.
Back to, leadership, did you find that the human nature, the employees that you worked with in both the magazine and in the television world were similar to radio, or were there differences?
There were differences. And offline, you can ask Rick Cummings about one of the comedy bits they did at a manager's meeting that the radio people thought was funny and the magazine people thought was disgraceful, but I won't. There were different sensibilities, but generally the culture was the culture,
When you were running now, in the company's obviously changed forms several times, but did you still find yourself more focused on the radio side, or how would you divide your time up?
It's funny. When I first started, I did everything. I picked every record. I typed the cart labels. I wrote the sales copy. I wrote the TV commercials. I've always, since the early days, learned to delegate and let my people do their jobs. I sort of said, I'm sort of like a goalie. I sit in my office and people shoot the puck at me all day, and some I stop and some get by me and some hit me right in the face. But it's just sort of dealing with whatever sort of the broadest vision of the company is at any given time.
That's a great analogy. Tell me a little bit about going public and the excitement around that.
Well, it's funny. Wall Street discovered this industry. It discovered it in really the early 90s. Lowry was the first to go public, and I think he would tell you that the first couple of years he was public, nobody cared, nobody loved it. As we got toward 96, you could see a lot more of Wall Street coming into the business. We went public in 94. And what you found was, capital found the radio industry and the TV industry. The rules changed. That was, at first it was 777. Then I think in the early 80s, it changed to 12, 12, and 12. Then we got duopolies in radio, which made it more attractive. And before the Telecommunications Act of 96 and right after it, there was just a glut of capital. And there's nothing as good as being a public company when your industry and your company's rising, because you can. It's easier to borrow money. It's easier to raise money through stock sales. You can use your currency to buy things. It's the greatest motivator for your people. Nothing's better than see your people get options that they cash in and they send their kids to college, or they buy themselves a home. And so it's just when your industry is growing and your stock is growing, it's wonderful. When it goes the other way, it's awful, absolutely awful. And I've lived all sides of it. I've lived a company. I think we went public in 1994 at $15.50 a share. It went all the way in 2000 to $124 a share, then split 2 for 1. And then when the bottom fell out in 2009, I think the stock was like 30 cents a share. And really in the last decade, the American radio industry's equity values have been nothing.
And it surprises me because you still look at an industry that cash flows incredibly well,
yeah,
and is very profitable. But I do agree that some valuations that you see tech companies, or you look at a company like Tesla that's valued, several times more than the Ford Motor Company,
yeah.
It doesn't seem logical on a lot of levels.
Well, when you look at, for example, streaming has attracted zillions of dollars of capital. So you look at Spotify with a market cap of like $30 billion, and they've never made money. I got in trouble once at a conference, and I said, we made more. Somebody asked about Pandora. I said, we love those guys, but I made more money at Emmis before breakfast today than they've made in 12 years.
I remember I was there. It was at Radio Inc. Forecast. That was a great comment. Yeah.
But I mean, that's the challenge. Wall Street loves what Wall Street loves, and capital flows where capital wants to flow. And there's just been an absolute appalling flight of capital away from traditional radio in the last really decade.
Was your father alive to see you go public?
Yes, although he died a few years later. But my dad saw the Mariners and saw sort of the skyrocket. And somebody, I'll never forget, we were at spring training one day, and somebody said, are you proud of your son? And he said, well, of course I'm proud. He said, think about it. I'm here. He said, Gene Autry's father would be 130 years old today. So I'm not, I know that was a great line. I think we were playing the Angels that day. And he said, well, of course I'm proud my son's here, and I'm here to watch him. And, he was, but my dad passed away many years ago. As a matter of fact, Monday will be his 100th birthday.
Oh my gosh.
That would have been 100, but he died, in 96. My mom passed away 6 years ago, so she lived, quite a bit longer. But
that's got to be incredibly special for them to be able to have witnessed that and to see that type of success. And family's important to you, and it is to me as well. And I'm always proud to share things about the business with my parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk me through the Mariners. How did that happen, and what made you decide to do it? I mean, you're the only person I've ever spoken to in my life that's owned a Major League Baseball team. So,
and I would forget the Mariners. It's funny. We love turnarounds. I mean, if you look at us in the '80s, it was buy something, fix it up, and make it better. And in those days, you could only buy one FM in a market. And by the late '80s, we had New York, LA, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, Washington, Houston, Indianapolis, Minneapolis. So we had, there wasn't much more we could do. And I think we always said, once you're in New York, you're really not dying to buy in Kokomo. So we had done Fan, and we'd gotten very close to the people with the Mets, because we bought Fan from the Doubleday family, which owned the Mets, and we carried them. And I think, somebody, in baseball said, you guys are turnaround guys. We really need somebody to turn around the Mariners. It's a mess. And it was owned by a brilliant guy, George Ardrose, who was a very, very successful real estate guy. But, George didn't want to spend money, and he was a sort of a Southern California conservative real estate guy, which is sort of the antithesis of what people in Seattle like. And I had been to Seattle as a kid and just thought it was the coolest place ever. And, I think in those days, we just said, this is what we do. It's a fixer upper. And people think, well, it's an ego trip. We have never bought a business, where we said we have to own it. I was a student of the economics of baseball. I always thought that the regionalization of cable was going to be a big deal. And that was really, my friend Greg Dees says, your problem is you see stuff too early. And we did, in that case. And I think what we didn't understand is it had been such an unloved franchise that we made great strides, just like NTS. The things we did in Seattle were just wonderful. But we could never get a cable deal, and the corporate community and the government was just kind of indifferent. And I've always said, we just didn't have the money to lose $15 million a year owning the Mariners. And especially when the radio business got worse. And so and when we bought it, we said, look, if we can't move the needle, we'll put it up for sale, and the city has the right to buy it. And I think I always say I became a pariah there because they thought nobody in their right mind is going to buy this team, and Smulyan's going to move it to Tampa. But I'm so proud of the stuff we did. I mean, we invented stuff that now is commonplace in ballparks. But we were going into the ninth inning. We had John Belushi saying, "Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?" And we did movie clips. I'll never forget Gary Kasich, who was the president of the team, and is my another dearest friend, like Cummings, came into the office one day and said, "I don't think we really have the right to take clips from famous movies." But it was so novel. It was such a novel idea that nobody knew. So we just took funny clips from movies, like the speech at the end of Hoosiers, and we had some Mr. Ed clips.
That's great.
And one of the studios called and said, you can't do that. And we said, well, why not? And he said, well, we haven't granted you permission. But it was novel. It was like, well, nobody ever tried that at a ballpark. We did all sorts of crazy stuff. We had singles nights. We had, where we would have one girl and three bachelors, and there was always, two normal looking bachelors, and one guy was 400 pounds, and the fans voted. The girl always got the 400-pound guy, but it was just fun, crazy stuff.
What a blast! Now, did you own the team when Ken Griffey Jr. was playing there?
Oh yeah, I love Kenny. Kenny would come in. Gary and I were like his big brothers, and in Seattle, we were one of the few teams that where our offices were about 2 blocks away. So every night we had a game, we'd walk over before the game, and there was a little area behind home plate where the guy who ran the radar gun would be,
right,
and it was a little seating area, and we would always go down there before the game, and then for the first few innings, because then we'd have to go up to the owner's box and entertain politicians and clients and whatever. But we thought at least we'll start the game, we'll have a couple cheeseburgers, and we'll shoot the breeze. And Kenny would come in every night and shoot the breeze with us, and I loved him. And then the next year we brought his dad in to play, and they played together. And I've always thought, I'm biased, I was a Willie Mays fan as a kid.
Sure.
But I've always thought that Kenny would have been the best player ever if he hadn't had injuries at the end of his career.
Yeah, he was amazing. What a great time for baseball too. You had the Bash Brothers and just an exciting era. And I mean, geez, so you're running stations, amazing brands throughout almost every major market.
Yeah.
You've got television, you've got the Mariners, you've got magazines. How at that point in your career, or in plus Wall Street and so forth, are you able to balance all this and make it work?
Well, they were all at different times. We didn't get into TV till 98. We had sold them by 92. So it was all, I don't know, you just sort of do what you do. And we always attracted great people. Our magazine people were great. Our TV people were great. And I thought, I've always been proud. I think I'm prouder of the things that didn't work. I thought the Mariners management was terrific. When we sold the team, Gary said, what could we have done different? I said, I think this is the best management you'll ever do, but you're just in a place where the math is just against you. Yeah. And that's a much longer story than we have.
To be able to say you were Ken Griffey Jr.'s boss and David Letterman's boss is pretty damn cool. And Rick Cummings' boss, of course. Tell me about joining a White House, or being invited to be on a White House delegation that helped negotiate an agreement between Israel and the Palestine liberation.
Well, I had actually met President Clinton when he was governor. It was in Seattle, and we had the National Governors Conference, and we had all the governors at the ballpark one night. And my friend Evan Bayh, who governor of Indiana, was there, and he had threw out the first pitch. And a friend of mine said, look, we want you to meet Bill Clinton for breakfast. So I met him for breakfast a Saturday morning, went to his hotel, and was just fascinated. Thought the most brilliant, engaging human being I've ever met. I mean, he's really a brilliant guy. And so I helped him. I did a fundraiser for him in Indianapolis. I remember asking him, it was 91, what are you doing running for president? President Bush has like a 70% approval rating. And he said, yeah, you never know. And a year later, he was elected president of the United States. And so when he got elected, they said, "Well, would you like to do something?" I said, "No, my mission after baseball was just to rebuild Emmis. Emmis had trouble." And then they called a few months after he was, inaugurated and said, "Look, we got a part-time thing. You could be a U.S. ambassador in charge of the U.S. delegation to the International Telecommunications Union. The conference itself is 6.5 weeks. It'll be in Kyoto next year. To prepare, we want to send you on 4 or 5 bilateral meetings around the world, but you can still keep your day job." And I talked to my kids at the time, and they thought it would be cool. And I accepted it. I had a wonderful delegation of about 50 people in my delegation.
Oh my gosh. This is a huge operation.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And we met, regularly in Washington before we went to Kyoto. And if you know the ITU, which I didn't know anything about, I always said they picked the one person on the planet who knew less about international telecommunications processes than me. But all of our delegation were people who had worked in the State Department and for the major phone companies and the satellite companies and Microsoft and, great technical wizards. And my job was to sort of steer our, position on certain things. And it was wonderful. And during about midway through the conference, one of the Arab states came to us and said, "Look," and you have to remember the time, Chachi. This was 1994. This was about 6 months after Oslo. And if you remember that long ago, the Oslo Accords really looked like it was going to be the start of a lasting peace between Israel and the PLO. And it's frightening how far back we've fallen since then. Uh-huh. But the idea was some of the Arab states wanted to get telecommunications infrastructure to the PLO because they were getting ready to build this new nation. And they said, in exchange for that, we will allow recognition of Israel, which had never happened in the UN system, whatever.
Jeez.
And so they came to me, and I ended up, doing the negotiating. I had State Department people, but for some reason, I ended up meeting with everybody. And you would meet with, with PLO, and then you meet with some Arab states. Some Arab states would meet with other Arab states. Some would meet with the PLO. And then there was Israel. And it was just, you shuttle back and forth. And it was one of the more gratifying things I've ever done. And it really taught me a lot. It's pretty well known I'm Jewish. I'm sure that everybody on all sides knew I was Jewish. I know the Israelis did. I'm pretty sure the Arab states did. But it taught me to bend over backwards to understand. And I really learned more about the Palestinians than I could have ever learned. And it was a wonderful, just incredibly rewarding experience.
What an amazing assignment. You're an actual ambassador.
I think if the president of the United States and the people in the State Department in Washington said, "Oh my God, we're going to send Smulyan in to do this," they would have gone, "Holy shit, we can't do that." But it just happened. I was on duty, and it was wonderful. It really was.
And then you would report back to President Clinton on progress?
I mean, not really. You'd report it back through channels, but yeah. I mean, I'll tell you one funny story which you'll appreciate.
Yeah, please.
This was, if you remember, you probably don't remember, but in the fall of 1994, Saddam Hussein amassed troops on the border with Kuwait. Now, if you remember 91 with the Gulf War,
sure.
President Bush had repelled them. And so I get up in the morning and I'm watching the president give a press conference saying the United States will defend Kuwait. This will not stand, et cetera, et cetera. So I go down to breakfast and there's the woman who was the Kuwaiti ambassador. And she comes up to me and says, "Mr. Ambassador, I need to understand my family's in Kuwait. I need to know that your country will support us." And I, of course, have just watched CNN.
Right.
And I said, "Well, you have our word. The United States will stand behind Kuwait." And one of my friends, in the delegation said, as she walked away, and said, "Oh my God," I think this woman thought, well, Ambassador Smulyan's been on the phone with President Clinton all night,
You were more up to speed than CNN.
Yeah, well, no. And one of the great lines of all time, one of my friends in the delegation said, "Thank God you were watching CNN this morning instead of the Cartoon Network, which you're normally watching." And you could tell me, That was one of the great lines of all.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
What an amazing assignment, and thank you for your service. I could talk to you about just this portion of your career for hours, but we obviously don't have the time. But question in regards to negotiation, and back to your you've made more money before breakfast than Pandora ever has. You've negotiated more deals before breakfast than I probably ever have. What is the difference between negotiating the purchase or sell of a radio station versus trying to negotiate amongst countries?
Well, I think I've always started with saying, what is the most important thing to the other side? Understand in any negotiation what is important to them, and then work from there. In most cases, you can accommodate the other side's interest and maximize your own interest. Now, there's always going to have to be give and take, but I always try to see any negotiation from the other person's side, because I got to understand what's important to them. I know what's important to me. It's always clear I know what's important to me, but I will always try to understand the other person and see if I can craft something that allows them to maximize their interest in a way that also allows me to maximize mine.
Great advice. I've got two more questions for you. About a year and a half ago, you were quoted in saying that it's becoming increasingly difficult to compete without scale. Yeah. And you made the decision to sell off a lot of your prized assets and businesses that you'd spent stations a tremendous amount of your career and life doing a great job building. Walk me through that decision and just the emotions.
I think we learned a long time ago. I think perversely, the next radio experience taught us some things about the business that worried us. When you talk about a business that you've given your life to, it's hard to look at it and say, boy, I just don't know. But we thought with our size and with some of the trends that we saw, we just thought, look, if we want to go on and maybe create value, we probably need to do it in other areas. And we said, look, we think we're really good at this. I think our people are as good at radio as anybody. But we said, look, if we don't drift out of this and we want another chapter for Emmis, it's not going to happen unless we monetize what we have and allow us to go buy some other things. And it breaks my heart because nobody loves this business more than I do. But we also, if you look at the numbers, and I've been fooling around writing this book, and you look at the history of ratings and revenues in the industry over the last 15 years, it's a frustrating thing.
It is evident by your love and passion and storytelling about the industry, how much you love it and how well you treat your staff and team members. Absolutely incredible. And something I try to live up to every day here, but don't come close to you. We'll talk about next. I actually didn't have it in my notes, but it is something that I think you should be commended for, because the passion and this dedication that we're hearing throughout this entire podcast is what you threw into Next Radio, and talking about being ahead of your time. And I felt, and I'll put it out there, I felt the industry did not back you like they should have, and it was something that was badly needed and such a phenomenal idea and cause. And I want to thank you on behalf of the industry for everything that you did, because I know you poured millions of dollars into it and a tremendous amount of effort, and had a phenomenal team working so much to activate the transmitters and the smartphones.
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things at the time. This goes back a number of years ago. We used to have, I think, 9 CEOs in the industry would meet, the 9 largest, I guess. And we were meeting in Katz's office in New York. And David Rear, before Gordon came in, David Rear walked into the meeting one day and said, look, if you go to phone stores in Asia and in Europe, you can put an FM radio in. And none of us had any idea. Showed us, explained it to us, and a light went on. And we said, oh my gosh, we got to get behind this. And he said, look, it's no secret that portability in radios declined precipitously. Nobody buys boom boxes anymore, and nobody buys Walkman. And all of us said, this is great. Somebody in the room, I don't know who it was, if I could figure it out, I would probably kill them, but that's another story. Somebody said, aren't you doing a project with Nokia in Finland? And yeah, we were working on a bid for a license in Finland, which we didn't get, but we partnered with Nokia, and they said, yeah. And they said, would you explore this? Because Nokia at that time was, this was before the iPhone.
Sure.
So I said, yeah. And I fell in love with the thing. The more I looked at it, I said, this is our answer. This is our answer for portability. This is our answer to be in the one place everybody's at. Fell in love with the thing. And then as time went on, the NAB a couple years later said, look, it's not enough to get these chips turned on. We got to build an ecosystem. And I think they probably went to, Clear Channel and Entercom or CBS or I don't know how many people. But Paul Brenner said, we can do that. And so we said, all right, we'll build it. And that was the launch. We had actually worked on a project with the industry, with Apple, for their iTunes store. And Paul had put together some things and said we could build this, and that's how Next Radio launched. And we all fell in love with it. And I believe then, I believe now that the biggest challenge the industry has is that you've really lost a generation of people who just care about the medium, and it's with them all the time. And we also knew that the applications worked in cars. And what we learned was that the car is really the place where the industry's got to take its stand. But I think we learned a lot. We did, again, some incredible work. I think it was a challenge. I think you had, obviously, iHeart it's just not their nature to play well with others. That's just who they are. And then I think you had an industry, which I think, I used to joke, say, guys, I appreciate all the awards, but rather the awards, just pitch in and help with this thing. And I think some people did, and some people said, not my problem. And we just finally said, one of my board members said, you realize that the entire research and development of the American radio industry is coming from us. And we finally said, this is silly. And we said, guys, either help fund it. The other thing we learned was because of the nature of the industry, that really getting widespread portability was only going to happen if you change commercial inventory. Paul Brenner walked into my office one day and said, when I look at listening patterns in Argentina and Brazil and, Peru and Canada, and you see, 6, 8, 9 minutes an hour, he said consumption changes as opposed to when people are running 15 minutes an hour. So you just drive them away. So we learned early on that the goal of really widespread listening in smartphones was going to be tough. Because they had streaming alternatives that they didn't hear the commercials.
Right. Well, man, it was a valiant effort, and something I think the industry owes you deep gratitude for leading. You just made a very exciting acquisition, a company called Lencore Acoustics.
Yeah.
Help me understand what made you decide to do that, and what Lencore does.
Well, we said, look, when we sold some of our assets and we had cash in the bank, we said, look, let's find things that we think are growing, that we think because of certain skill sets we have, we can make them grow more. We found Lencore. It is a business that does sound masking. Or as Rick and Chase said one day, we spent our whole lives trying to get people to listen to stuff, and now we're trying to produce a product where they can't listen. But it's for offices. It's also, the next iteration is for hospitals and maybe even in universities. There's all sorts of restaurants maybe, where you basically can, as people go to more open offices and with less acoustic material, that you can deaden the sound. And we fell in love with it. It was a family business. It was sort of the leader in the space. But we said, boy, the best thing about our group is we're smart enough to know what we don't know. So we said, we don't know this, this, and this, but we had the people that did. But we said we could really help with some of the sales and the sales training, and the research and the marketing. And we thought that it had the ability to grow, very nicely. Now, so far, yeah.
Fascinating company. I did a little bit of research, and its capabilities through technology can deaden the sound of a room. And so we're so used to using studio doors and windows and sound baffling, and this literally does it through sound itself, I believe. It's way over my head, but I found it just amazing that this is even possible.
And it is, and of course the running joke around Emmis is that it is, the world has gone to open offices. Sure. And we did all sorts of due diligence on this, but of course we said, leave it to us to buy a business when the pandemic creates a world where nobody goes back into an office again, and that would be Emmis. And so, but no, we think it's got some great applications, and because of HIPAA laws, it's got some great applications in medical.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so we're excited. It's just early. I mean, we bought it, and a few weeks later, here comes the pandemic, and but it's actually held up pretty well.
My last question. And you shared with me a little bit earlier that you've started writing a book.
Yes. Yeah.
How did that come to be?
Well, as I said, I have 2 grown children and 2 grandchildren, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. And my 16-year-old daughter, my favorite 30 minutes a day, driving her to school every day for all these years, since she was in kindergarten. And
awesome, you do that.
Yeah, and we just talk about everything, and it's sort of dad's lessons. And if you talk to any one of my 3 kids, they'll tell you, dad's always, here's what you learned, here's what you learned, here's what you learned. And my daughter has got this great quirky sense of humor. Said, Dad, you got to write this down. These stories are great. And so during the pandemic, I was finding myself in my office because my wife and my 2 golden doodles and my daughter weren't thrilled to have me home all the time. So my office was quiet. I come down here. But I just started writing and wrote like 300 pages. And it was just, what have I learned? What lessons have I learned? And it was cathartic. I love doing it. I don't know what I'll do with it. But I've got a couple of people who said, look, you got to publish this. And so, we'll see. But it was just, I haven't titled it, but it would probably be, what have we learned? When I walk into a meeting, I always go, guys, okay, what have we learned? What do we know today? So that it was just lessons I've learned in life through all these experiences. And I have, there are crazy stories. I've had a couple of people read it, and they said, I laughed out loud, and I never laugh out loud. So who knows? But it was cathartic.
I'm thrilled that you are doing this project, and I really hope that you publish it, because I promise to buy a copy. I would this is just a taste of this podcast of, I imagine, what would be in the book, and I could talk to you for hours. And so I will absolutely, not only will I get one, but I will make sure that the entire Benztown team has a copy.
Well, I have a strange feeling if there's ever anybody who's going to get a free autographed copy, if I do publish it, you would be at the top of the list, Jeff.
I appreciate that, man. Jeff, thank you so much for your time today and sharing these stories. Just been a pure pleasure. And again,
great.
Everything you've done for the industry, I have watched you my whole career and have looked up to the way that you treat people, the way that you grow brands, your entrepreneurial spirit. You've got guts that I've got so much respect for, and it's just been an honor to talk to you today.
Gotcha. You have made a lot of fans at Emmis, I will tell you that, and I thank you too. And this is fun. This is delightful doing this.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks.